The step gives a little when she sits down on it. It always has. She has known for 12 years that it would be an hour's work to fix it. Pull the nail, reset the board. Done. She has never done it. Some mornings she thinks she is keeping it the way another woman might keep a letter. Some mornings she thinks she is just a person who doesn't fix steps. This morning there is no thinking about it. She sits, and the step gives, and the light comes in low across the yard, the way it does in August, flat and amber, already warm before the dew is off the grass. Her granddaughter is in the yard, 8 months old, and pulling herself across the ground on 2 fists, looking at the world like it owes her something. She gets that from her mother. Her mother got it from somewhere. The coffee in her hands is still hot. She is 51 years old. These are the facts of the morning. And then, the way it always comes, not slowly, not with any warning she could name, the memory arrives. It starts where it always starts. Not with what came after, with the wagon. July 14th, 1873. She can still call up the sound of it, the wheels on the hardpan, the dry creak of the axle that was not her axle, the axle that still worked, moving away. She had been standing in the road 2 miles outside a town she did not know yet. The sun had been up for perhaps an hour. The air had that particular summer quality she would come to know as Kansas, bright and indifferent, a sky too big to care. Her own axle was cracked through. She'd heard it go the night before, a sound like a green branch splitting, and by first light she had known it would not hold. They said they would come back. The man at the head of the party, the one who had organized everything from St. Louis, said the words with his eyes already on the horizon. "We'll send someone from the next town." He said it the way a person says something they have already decided not to do. She recognized it because she had heard it before, from other mouths, in other years, and she had learned by then what that particular sentence meant. It meant she was staying. They did not slow. The last wagon rolled past her where she stood in the road. She watched it go. She did not call after them. There was nothing to call. What she had was this: a sewing basket, a blue wool coat that made no sense in July, and a cracked axle. She would drag herself to the livery at the edge of a town she had never seen, because there was nothing else to do, and because she was 39 years old and had stopped waiting to be collected. In the yard, her granddaughter makes a sound, pleased with something, some small discovery in the dirt. She watches her, drinks her coffee. The memory does not stop. It never stops at the road. The axle was heavier than it looked. She had known it would be. She had known from the moment she wrapped both hands around the broken end and lifted that this was not a thing she would manage easily, and that it did not matter, because there was no other option, and she was already moving. 2 miles. The road was pale with dust, and the sun came in flat and merciless from the east, and she carried the blue coat over her arm because she could not leave it and could not wear it, and the sewing basket hung from her wrist and knocked against her hip with every step. She did not think about the wagons. She thought about the road. One section at a time. The rut here, the hard pan there. A place where the ground went soft near a dry creek bed, and her boot sank, and she pulled it free without stopping. She shifted the axle to her other shoulder and kept walking. The coat dragged in the dust once, and she gathered it back up and held it higher. The basket knocked. The sun moved. Holt's Crossing appeared, the way small towns appear on flat ground, all at once, after nothing. A water tower, a roof line, then a main street, narrow and pale, with a livery at the near end, and a general store she could see from where she came out of the scrub. She walked to the livery because it was first. The man inside was middle-aged, with a careful expression she would come to understand was his only expression. He looked at the axle. He looked at her. He did not say anything for a moment, and she waited, and then he said, "You're the one they left." Not a question. She set the axle down against the post and straightened. He said, Platform wasn't empty when the wagons came through this morning. Couple men saw the whole party come in for water. He paused, saw them leave again, counted fewer than came. She understood then that she had arrived already narrated, that somewhere in this town a version of her morning existed that had been spoken aloud before she had walked through it herself. She did not know yet whether that was better or worse than arriving invisible. She stood in the livery doorway with the coat over her arm and the basket at her wrist, and waited to find out what came next. The liveryman looked at the axle again. "This yours?" She said it was. He looked at it a moment more, the way men look at things they are calculating. Then he said, "I can't fix this. You'd want the carpenter for this." He said the word carpenter, the way people say the name of a specific person while pretending it is a general noun. She filed that away. She did not ask which carpenter. She already understood there was only one worth saying. She found the general store by following the street until the street ended and the boardwalk ran out. It was past 8 in the morning by then. The heat had already settled in the way July heat settles in Kansas, not arriving, not building, simply present, as though it had always been there and always would be. She set her sewing basket on the top rail of the hitching post outside the door. Then she stood beside it. That was all. She did not have a sign. She did not call out. She stood with her hands at her sides and the basket open, and waited for someone to look at her long enough to wonder. The first two men who came through did not look. The third glanced at the basket and kept walking. A woman in a gray dress came out of the store with a wrapped parcel and passed close enough that their skirts nearly touched, and she looked at the ground and moved on. The street was not busy, but it was not empty. People moved through it with the particular economy of people who have things to do in the heat of the morning before the heat of the afternoon makes doing anything harder. Nobody stopped. She waited. At 9:30, a woman paused, not out of warmth. She paused the way a person pauses to inspect something before deciding it isn't worth the trouble. She looked at the basket, looked at the woman standing beside it, and said, "What do you do?" "Mending, alterations." She said it plain. The woman looked her over in a way that was not unkind, but was not friendly either. Then she said her husband had a coat with a button gone, for 6 weeks. She said it the way you say a thing you have been annoyed by, longer than you intended to be annoyed by it. She asked if she had the button. The woman did not. She opened her basket and found one close enough. She sat on the edge of the boardwalk and did the work right there. It took 4 minutes. The woman paid her 3 cents. She said thank you. She did not say it too much. The morning passed. The afternoon came. She did not move from her spot except once, to step into the shade of the overhang when the sun moved directly overhead. She finished 2 more repairs, a seam, a torn pocket, for 2 different men who did not offer their names and did not ask for hers. She charged 2 cents each. They paid without argument. By the time the light had gone amber and thin, she had 9 cents, and the knowledge that she had earned them, and that knowledge sat somewhere in her chest, in a place that was not pride exactly, but was close enough to use. She put the coins in the bottom of the basket beneath the thread. She closed the lid. She looked at the end of the street where the last of the light was going. She had nowhere to sleep. She walked south. Not because she had decided on south, because south was where the boardwalk ended, and past the boardwalk there was scrub grass and open ground, and nobody standing in it watching her go. That was reason enough. The light was low and orange by then, and the insects had started their evening business in the tall, dry stalks at the edge of town. She could hear the saloon behind her, a door, someone's laugh, brief and swallowed. Then, nothing but the grass moving. The parcel was 40 yards past the last building, a leaning shed that appeared to have given up somewhere in the middle of a repair, and stayed that way. Past it, the land opened, short scrub, a few cottonwood saplings along what might have been a creek line once, a flat stretch of ground that had been cleared at some point and then forgotten. She could see where a structure had stood, stones arranged in a square, still mostly in their order, a chimney's foundation with nothing above it. The grass had grown back in through the center of it, soft and pale, and the whole thing sat in the early dark like something that had remembered how to be ground again. She did not look for long. She set her basket down, collected the driest grass she could find, found 2 stones that would do what stones needed to do, and had a small fire going before the last color left the sky. She sat close enough to be warm and far enough to be careful. She did not sleep until the fire had died to coals, and she slept lightly, one hand on the basket. Nobody came. The second night was the same. On the morning of the third day she woke early, before the town made any sound, and she decided to clear a proper ring for the fire. The ground was harder than it looked. She worked with a stick and then with her hands, scraping back the dry soil, moving stones. It was in the 3rd or 4th scrape, about 6 inches down on the east side of the ring, that the stick caught on something that rang. Not loud, a small, dull ring, the kind a stone makes when it is not a stone. She cleared the dirt with her fingers. It was iron, a stake, roughed with rust, perhaps 8 inches long. One end was sharpened, still driven into the ground, and the other end had been stamped with something she had to tilt toward the early light to read. 1869. She did not know what it meant. She thought briefly about leaving it where it was. Then she pulled it free. It came loose easier than she expected, the ground having given up holding it, and she turned it over once in her palm. The rust came off on her skin in a fine reddish dust. She put it in her coat pocket. She made her fire. She heated water. She watched the town begin to wake in the distance, chimney by chimney, and she did not think about the pin again, not that morning. The 4th morning she woke before the town did. She had slept in her coat again, the blue wool heavy with dew. Her fire was ash. The sky was still gray at the edges, lightening slow toward the east, and she sat up and listened to the distance. A horse somewhere, the creak of a sign in the early wind, nothing else. She made water boil. She had a heel of bread left from what the liveryman's wife had given her, unbidden, 2 days ago. She ate half of it and put the other half in the basket. Then she set the basket on her knee and opened the top and looked at the things inside. Thread, needles wrapped in cloth, a pair of small scissors. A thimble her mother had pressed into her hand at a train platform in Missouri, 17 years ago, without explanation. She closed the basket. She was not waiting. She had told herself she was not waiting. By mid-morning she had walked the perimeter of the parcel again, measuring it in steps the way she had begun to do without knowing why. Some instinct toward knowing what was hers, even if it was nothing. Even if she would be told to move on before the week was out. 112 steps along the south edge, more than she had thought. She came back up toward the road and stopped. A man was crossing the street at the far end of the block, not toward her. Across the street, heading toward the dry goods side, and she watched him, because there was nothing else to watch, and because he moved without any particular hurry, which in her experience meant either that a man had nowhere urgent to be, or that he had decided where he was going and saw no reason to announce it. He stopped. He had not looked at her when he crossed. He was not looking at her now, exactly. He was standing at the edge of the road with his hat pushed back slightly, looking at something just past her, the land, the parcel, the scrub grass that ran down toward the low ridge. She did not move. Then he turned. He came toward her at the same unhurried pace, and stopped, perhaps 4 feet away, and said, without preamble, without looking at the basket first, or the coat, or any of the things a person usually looked at, "Can you sew canvas?" Not a question, quite. The way he said it, it was already practical, already past the part where it might be refused. She said yes. He said his shop had a corner. A table could fit there. Room and board for the work, temporary, until she sorted what came next. She picked up the basket. He turned and walked back toward the west end of the main street, and she followed him. And between the parcel and the shop door, not another word passed between them. The shop smelled of pine resin and something older underneath it. Oil worked into the floorboards over years of use. She stood just inside the door, while he moved to the back without ceremony, clearing a section of the long table along the east wall, with 2 pulls of his arm, setting a crate beneath it, without asking if the height would suit. It would suit. She could see that from where she stood. She moved to the table and set the basket down and did not say anything about it. There was a room above the shop. He showed her the stairs and left her to it. By the time supper came, she had not unpacked anything except her needles and a spool of thread, which she set at the corner of the table as if marking the boundary of something. The kitchen was small, attached to the rear of the shop by a short hall, and when she came through the door, the girl was already at the table. 7 years old, hair dark, pulled back with more practicality than care. She was eating with both elbows on the table and looked up without self-consciousness when the woman came in, the way children look at things, fully, without deciding first whether to. They sat. The carpenter put food on the table and took his chair. No one spoke for the first portion of the meal. Then the girl said, "Why are you wearing a wool coat in summer?" The woman looked at her. The girl was not being unkind. She was asking what she wanted to know. "It's what I had," the woman said. The girl considered this. Then she reached across the corner of the table. Her arm was short and she had to lean and touch the sleeve of the coat. Just the cuff, 2 fingers. "It's the color of a river," she said. Not a compliment, exactly. More like a naming. The way a child identifies a thing she intends to remember. The woman did not know what to say to that, and so she said nothing. She looked at the coat sleeve where the girl had touched it. The wool dark from the summer heat, worn smooth at the wrist. The carpenter had not looked up from his plate, but she noticed, in the way that a person notices something without deciding to, that he was watching his daughter, not with expression. He was watching the way he did everything, steadily, without announcement, the way a man watches something he is glad of, but will not say. Then he reached across and refilled her coffee. She had not asked. She had not even finished what was in the cup yet. He set the pot back without looking at her, and returned to his plate. The girl was still looking at the coat. Outside, the last light was going down behind the ridge, and the shop creaked once in the cooling air, and the evening settled in around all 3 of them like something that had nowhere else to be. 3 weeks went by the way work goes, in pieces small enough that you didn't notice them accumulating until you looked up and the shape of the days had changed. The mending table was her doing. She asked on the 4th morning, plain as asking for a glass of water, whether there was a corner of the shop he wasn't using. He looked at the east wall, looked back at her, and said there was. She moved a sawhorse and set her basket down, and that was the arrangement. No terms discussed, no terms needed. Word got around, the way things did in a town that size. By the end of the 1st week, a woman came in with a split seam on her husband's good coat. By the end of the 2nd, there were 3 more. They came in the afternoon mostly, when the light through the east window was best, and the sound of her scissors and the carpenter's plane ran alongside each other, the way 2 clocks in the same room eventually settle into the same rhythm without trying. The girl started appearing at 3:15 each day. School let out at 3. She would come in, set her reader on the corner of the mending table, and sit on the stool the carpenter had placed there sometime in the 2nd week, without saying anything about it. She did her lessons, the woman mended. The shop held the particular quiet of 2 people working in the same space, who have decided, without discussing it, not to waste the quiet. It was the girl who first asked about the pin. She had seen it on the 3rd morning, when the woman had set it on the table beside her basket. She didn't know why. only that she'd been carrying it in her coat pocket for 2 weeks, and her coat was too warm for August, and she needed somewhere to put it. The girl had picked it up, turned it in her fingers, set it back, said it looked old. The woman had agreed. She forgot about it for 3 weeks. Then, one afternoon in the middle of August, between customers, she set it on the shop counter and asked. To no one in particular. The girl was doing her reading. The carpenter was fitting a drawer back into its housing. Whether anyone knew what it was. An iron pin of some kind, 8 inches maybe, stamped with something. The girl looked up. The carpenter did not. He kept his hands on the drawer for a moment, then he set it down, came to the counter. He picked up the pin, turned it. The stamp was on the flat end. She had looked at it herself and made nothing of it. He read it with his thumb more than his eyes, the pad of it moving over the raised numbers the way a person confirms something they already half suspected. He set it on the counter. He did not set it back in her hand. The girl had gone quiet on her stool. Outside, someone's horse shifted against the hitching post, and the afternoon held very still. He said nothing. He set the pin on the counter and he said nothing, and after a moment he went back to the drawer and fitted it into its housing, and the afternoon continued. She watched him for a moment, the way a person watches a door that has just been knocked on but not answered. Then she picked the pin up herself and put it in her apron pocket, and that was that. Except it was not. She knows that now. Sitting on this porch in 1885, with the sound of her grandchildren in the yard, and the summer air moving slow through the cottonwoods, she knows that the afternoon did not simply continue. Something had changed in it. The light was the same. The dust in the street was the same. But he had touched the pin the way you touch something you recognize, and he had set it down instead of handing it back, and those were 2 different things. She did not understand that then. She put it in her pocket and went back to her mending. He was quiet that week. Not unfriendly, just interior. She had learned by then to read the difference. When he was simply tired, he moved slower. When he was thinking, he moved exactly the same as always, but he looked past things rather than at them. On August the 2nd, she woke, before light, to the sound of rain, and when it stopped, she lay still in the back room she had made her own in the weeks since arriving. Through the thin wall, she could hear him moving in the shop, setting something down, the creak of the iron stove opening and closing. By morning, he was gone. The shop was locked. The girl was at a neighbor's, where she had been since the day before. No note on the door. No word left for anyone that she could find. She opened her own work that morning, and did not ask anyone where he had gone. The woman at the dry goods counter offered it to her anyway. Dodge City, she said. Or that was what he had told old Harris at the livery. But why? Was not offered, and she did not ask. He was gone 2 days. He came back on August the 4th, late afternoon, his horse carrying the dust of it. She was at her table when he came in, a man's coat spread in her lap, her needle moving steadily. He did not say where he had been. He pulled something from his coat, folded, official-looking, the kind of paper that came sealed with county stamps, and he set it on the counter in front of her. He did not explain it. He went to the stove and poured himself what was left of the morning's coffee, and stood with his back half-turned, drinking it, as though the document on the counter were nothing remarkable. She set down her needle. She picked it up. The paper was heavy stock, the kind the county used for anything permanent. It had been folded twice, carefully, which meant he had folded it himself before writing back. The seal was already broken. He had read it, or watched them write it, or both. She unfolded it. Her eyes moved down the page the way eyes do when they are looking for something specific and already half afraid of finding it. The heading first. Land claim, South Parcel. And then the legal description, the acreage, 40 acres as surveyed in 1869. The boundary lines running from the iron stake at the southeast corner. She knew that stake. She had pulled it from the ground herself and carried it back to camp in her coat pocket. without knowing what it was. And then the names. Hers was first. She stood at that counter for a long time. She was not aware of how long. Long enough that the light shifted a degree. Long enough that she heard his plane moving steadily across the board. One stroke, then another. The sound of it even and unhurried. The sound of a man doing ordinary work on an ordinary afternoon. He was not watching her. His back was angled toward the bench, his shoulders moving with the work, and he had not turned since he set the document down. She looked at his name beneath hers. She looked at the county stamp, the date, August 3, 1873, and the clerk's signature below it, the ink still dark enough to be recent. She thought of the horse carrying the dust of 2 days' road. She thought of him riding out before daylight on August the 3rd, without a word to anyone, without leaving a note on the door, and riding back the next afternoon with this inside his coat. She did not know how to hold that. She did not try. She folded the document, twice, the same 2 folds, and she looked up. He was already at the bench, planing a board, not watching her. The shavings curled off the wood and fell in small pale arcs, and he kept on with it, just kept on, as though what he had done was nothing worth turning around for. She did not say thank you. There was no language that fit, and she had enough sense not to find a lesser one. She walked back to her table. She set the document in her sewing basket, beneath the spare thread and the folded flannel, down at the bottom, where the things that mattered lived. She sat down, she picked up her needle. Outside, the afternoon held still and burning. Neither of them spoke again until supper. She is sitting on the porch now, in the August of 1885, and she knows she did not cry. Not that day, not in the weeks after, not even when she understood, fully understood, what he had done, that he had ridden 2 days and filed her name alongside his, without once asking whether she wanted it there. She has turned that fact over many times in the years since. She has tried to locate the moment when she might have wept and found nothing, only the counter, the smell of fresh paper, the shavings curled on the floor behind him. It is the clearest thing she carries, clearer than the wedding, which was small and plain and done before the first frost, a thing that happened because they had both been through enough to know when something was already decided. Clearer than the years that followed, clearer than his face in the last weeks of his life, which she will not allow herself to revisit now, because the sun is good today, and the children are playing at the fence line, and she has not come to the end of the remembering yet. The counter, the fold of the paper, his back turned, already at the bench. That is what stays. By September of 1873, the walls were up. He framed them on a Saturday, with 2 men from town she did not know by name, and she fed them from a pot she'd hung over the fire outside. The land was still dry, the grass still pale from the summer, but the air had shifted, something in it that said the worst was past. She watched him work from 20 yards off, not watching, exactly, just aware of where he was, the way you become aware of a fixed point you've stopped needing to look at directly. The corners went in square. He checked them twice. She did not know then what she knows now, that a man who checks his corners twice is building something he intends to last. She did not let herself think in those terms. She thought, walls. She thought, before winter. She thought, I will need a proper table for the mending work, not just the space in his shop. His daughter brought her a cup of water that afternoon and stood next to her for a while without speaking. The girl was 7. She watched her father the same way. By October, there was a roof. By the time the first hard freeze came, there was a door, and a window facing south, and a step at the threshold that he said he'd fix properly in the spring. He never did fix it. Neither has she. By November, the house was done. She moved the mending table in on a Thursday, 2 neighbors helping carry it without being asked. He had built a shelf along the south wall, the right height, the right depth, without measuring her reach that she had noticed. She did not remark on it. She set her basket on it, and that was enough. The shop on the west end of Main Street went back to being only a carpenter's shop. Her chair was no longer next to the window there. The chair was now inside a house on 40 acres she still did not know was hers. The years moved the way years do when you have stopped waiting for them to stop. His daughter grew. She lost a tooth in the winter of 1874 and presented it to her like evidence of something. In the spring of 1875, the kitchen garden came in. Onions first, then beans, then a row of squash that sprawled past the fence line like they had somewhere to be. A hard winter in 1876 took the squash and half the fence. He rebuilt the fence in March. She replanted in May. The onions came back before anything. The girl turned 12, and then 15, and learned to hem a skirt with small, even stitches, and sat with her at the mending table on Saturday afternoons, saying almost nothing, which was its own kind of conversation. There were good years. There were ordinary years. There was one spring that smelled like something she could not name, something from before, from a window somewhere, a particular morning, and she stood at the door a long time trying to locate it, and could not, and finally went back inside and did not try again. November 1880. He came inside at 2:30 in the afternoon. She was at the table. He never came in at 2:30. She heard the door and looked up, and he was already sitting down across from her, his hands flat on the wood, and he said he didn't feel right. He said it the way he said most things, plain, without alarm, as if he were reporting a measurement that had come out slightly off. She looked at his hands. They were still. She put down the shirt she was mending. She did not ask him to describe it. She got up and put the kettle on, and when she turned back around, he was looking at the window, at the south light, the way he sometimes looked at a piece of wood he was trying to understand. By January, he was gone. By January, he was gone. That is the sentence she arrives at every time, no matter which direction she comes from. She can begin at the smell of that spring morning she couldn't name, or at the sound of the door at 2:30, or at the particular stillness of his hands on the table, and she always ends there. By January, he was gone. Plain, without alarm, like a measurement that came out slightly off. She has been sitting on this porch since mid-morning. The step under her foot is loose. It has been loose since before he died. He meant to fix it, said so twice, never did, and she has never fixed it either. She is not sure what that is. She has thought about it enough to know she cannot think her way to the answer, and so she has mostly stopped trying. Her granddaughter fell asleep in the yard grass 20 minutes ago, just tipped sideways in the sun the way infants do, as if sleep were a decision that arrives all at once. One moment sitting, the next gone. She watches the rise and fall of the small chest from the porch and does not get up. Inside, on the windowsill, the surveyor's pin sits where she placed it after he died. Iron stake, 8 inches, the year 1869 stamped into the flange. She has not moved it. She does not need to go inside to see it. She knows exactly where it is, knows the angle of afternoon light that catches the rust along one edge, knows the small flat sound it makes if a door closes hard enough to shift it. She knows all of it from 12 years of knowing. She does not go inside. The yard is quiet except for the grass moving. The fenced line runs exactly where he laid it out. She walked that boundary with him once. A June morning, neither of them speaking, just walking the edge of what they had. She didn't understand then what it meant that his name and her name were both on the document in Dodge City. She understood it later. She understood it all the way through. The loose step, the pin on the sill, the fence at the boundary of 40 acres, she never would have claimed alone. She has left them as they were. She is not certain that is grief. She is not certain it is something better than grief. She has lived long enough to know that some things don't resolve into a name. They just sit on the windowsill, catching light, and you go on around them. The baby stirs in the grass, settles again. She stays on the porch,